Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. I'm Nils Smith, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Nick Runyon. And we have a special guest with us today. DJ Soto is joining us, and he is the pastor of the Virtual Reality Church. As far as I'm aware, and I've been following virtual reality for a long time, and online church, and just church in general, this is the first virtual reality church in the world that I'm aware of. DJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh man, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, let's dig into what the virtual reality church is. I want to hear about your background, but I think everyone listening to this probably wants to know what is a virtual reality church? How did this get started? What do you do? How does this work?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, we're, one of the first churches in virtual reality that we know of. And, just in the past year or two, the virtual reality headsets have come out that like the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive. And, I got one of those and they're amazing. The movies, the video games, it's just an immersive experience. And really it's kind of like, if you've seen The Matrix where Morpheus tells Neo, it's like, you can't explain what the Matrix is. You have to experience it for yourself. And I find that that's what VR is, because I talk to people about it and they're like, oh, that's interesting. And then when I put them in the headset, they just can't believe what they've experienced. And
Yes.
It's such a new technology. It's hard to explain or give a reference to, because there's nothing been like it. I think people get the general idea, you put this headset on and you're transported into a place, but until you've tried it, and I'm not talking about those like $30 ones you get at the airport kiosk. I'm talking about like these high-end ones, and it's just an amazing experience. And so anyways, I got one of the headsets, I'm gaming, I'm watching the 360 videos, and then the social spaces started coming out.
Yeah.
So maybe a simplified way of saying it is like the Facebook version of virtual reality, where you just are gathering with people, you add people as friends, you can chat, play games and do different things. And so when that came out, I got in there and I saw that you could create your own space. I saw that you could control like a Jumbotron type of thing. And my gifting and background is in church planning and entrepreneurship. And so as soon as I experienced it, within the first hour of being in virtual reality social space and specifically AltSpace VR, I was like, oh man, we have to try to have a church here. And so that was on a Friday. And so I got on with my graphic designer. I was like, hey, listen, I want to do a service in virtual reality in 3 days. Or in a couple of days, can you whip me up a graphic? So he whipped up a graphic. I threw it on social media, and I had my first church service. It was the summer of 2016, and in virtual reality. And it was just awesome. It was exciting. I mean, only 5 people came to the first service, but my first visitor there was an atheist from Denmark. And there's a whole story I could talk to you about how we're connecting with agnostic and atheists, but yeah, and it was just amazing. And we just started doing it whenever we could. It wasn't necessarily consistent at that time, but we just did it whenever we could. And but we started doing it weekly official services in May of 2017, when a team of us got together, kind of created some little bit of a structure around it, and said, hey, we're going to have services every week officially. And that was May of 2017. So wow. That's kind of the nutshell version of what's going on.
I love it. And I love too that you experienced it, and within 3 days you go to church there. So you think about any other church historically. Well, not saying that the early church was kind of that way. Like, as the way we see church plants is, you've got to go raise money. You got to go get your core team. You got to then develop your strategy document. And that takes 6 months, and you start meeting at home. You just like, you know what? We created a graphic. We put it on Facebook. We put it on social media. We had church 3 days later, and then we kind of figured it out. I love it. Okay, let's get practical. What is a church service look like in virtual realities? And one, like, where my mind goes is like, what's your land space? Like, where do you like go to somebody? Like, how does somebody come and find you in virtual reality? And what is the experience like?
So, we're on the AltSpace platform, and, it's kind of like I mentioned before, a Facebook or a version of virtual reality. So in that platform, you have events. So they go to the event section and they'll see comedy night. And And those are cool, man. You go to those things and you're in a comedy club and there's a guy on stage and like I said before, if you haven't tried it, it's like explaining something like, have you been to the Grand Canyon? If they haven't seen that before, it's like, oh, it's huge. It's a big thing. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I kind of stumble on that. And, so they'll see the event. They go to the event section and people will see virtual reality church. And you can like it or say, I want to attend that event, and you'll get notification. And then once that event is live, people will put on their headsets and they'll be transported into the space. And the way we started out was using kind of like the default spaces of that Altspace had. They had like a movie theater. They had like a skyscraper room. And sorry if you hear the airplanes. I'm right by LAX, so if you hear that kind of rumbling. And then, so we were using their space for the longest time. And it's people come in, teleport right into the space and walk around. And it's a 3D immersive environment. It's like the avatars are as high as you are. So, 5-6 foot avatars walking around. And with the touch controllers, people can move their hands and you see hand gestures and those types of things. So
it's just like a real church plant, though, meeting in an elementary school or something. You're borrowing somebody else's space.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, they'll walk into the space and it looks very much like a elementary school or a movie theater. There's the screen. And so, we'll do all the elements. There's like a welcome, and then we'll do worship music, and then I'll do a greeting, and then there'll be a sermon. And so there's all these elements from the physical world that translate very well into the virtual reality world. And so, that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of how people interact.
Yeah. So when you do, oh man, this is so cool. When you do a welcome, are you going on stage and like in front of everybody and you do a welcome, or music? Like what does that look like? The music? Do you have a band that plays, or how?
So in the gist is like, think of like a, maybe a church service that you would have, and the pastor gets on stage. That's exactly what I do. I'll walk up on stage and I'll talk, and they'll see me. I'm a I don't know what the measurements are, but I'm like a 5 or 6 foot avatar at full size. They see my hand gestures, you know what I mean? Yeah. I'll welcome them. So I'm on stage as the virtual reality pastor and do a welcome, and we go right into the music. And so the music, we use a lot of stuff from open resource from life.church.
Yeah.
And so they have a great resources there. So some of their worship songs that we can take and lyric videos. And so for worship, we'll do like lyric video. And but we do have live worship sometimes. So not necessarily a band because there's sync issues involved. But we have a guy that'll just jam on his guitar and just sing, and his avatar is up there, and he's just jamming away and singing. So he'll do some songs there, and then awesome. We'll go into the sermon, and I'll have just like in church, slides behind me, going up, graphics going up behind me, and it's really, really cool.
I love
that. Is very, very cool.
There's so many things in my mind. I launched onlinechurch.com about 7 years ago, and we kind of said them and now I had a model with like Life Church and others that I kind of tinkered with it to copy. But we had to figure out things like communion and baptism. How are you, getting into things like the sacraments? How do you process that? And then I'm curious then about small groups and Bible studies of what translates and what doesn't.
Yeah. And, one thing just to hit on real quick is that, talking with pastors or pastor friends, they're like, well, what's the community like? What's the interactions like? Shouldn't they be physically in church? And I'm definitely all for that. I was like, I think physically is the best experience, but there is in virtual reality a sense of immersion and connection that's really, really close to the physical environment. And in some cases, I think exceeds it, because the avatar with a sense of anonymity creates a lot of authenticity. And there's just some strong conversations that we have that I don't know that we would have in a physical church. And so one of my first sermons I'm preaching, a lot of our sermons are, encouraging and helping people in their spiritual lives. And a lady from Britain just popped right in and started talking about being bullied and the hurts that she's gone through. And I don't know, in the physical church that conversation would have happened. And so, and I think there's a lot of that. People come up to me talking about their depression or their addictions, and just, right there in church, we're just talking about these things. that maybe it would take a little bit longer in a physical church to happen. So to my pastor friends, which I totally get, I say, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think that in VR, there's a sense of that people are more, more open and more, just because of that anonymity, that they can just kind of freely talk. And so, but, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would support that from my own experience as well. Like being in digital evangelism, we would always talk about it as anonymous intimacy. And it's where people go very deep, very quickly. And I think I'm curious about your thoughts on, I think people are always kind of carrying around, if they're new to church, and really we want to take the gospel to people that don't yet know it. Yeah. But there's kind of all these questions and barriers and kind of objections that they might have. I think you get there faster. I mean, is that what you see in some of that interaction?
Man, yes, absolutely. Totally. I've been in ministry 20 some years, one facet or the other, small churches, mega churches, traditional, modern, all these expressions. And I've never experienced what I'm experiencing in virtual reality church, where it is that fast, authentic conversations that just happen and people get real quickly. And I do think it's because there's that anonymity with the avatar. And one of the things is we're attracting a lot of like atheists and agnostics, and they're just talking about their atheism and their doubts about church and God. And there's something about that platform and that environment that invites all that. So I think you're absolutely right. It's just amazing, I
love it. So a lot of pastors, and I remember early days of the internet, of should a church even have a website? What the excuse that pastors would say, and like we laugh now, but because it's like, duh, of course you should have a website. But back then, pastors would say, the internet is just a bunch of porn. We should stay away from that. Now, virtual reality is getting the same tack. It's shooter games and pornography is what it's known for. And so I think churches and some ministry leaders are feeling like, that's not it. We shouldn't be encouraging people to go get into virtual reality, because it's discouraging real relationships, and it's encouraging pornography. What is your perception on that, or how would you kind of respond to a pastor about that?
I love the local church. I love the church so much. Like I'm with, I think Bill Hybels talked about the local church as the hope of the world, man, and I love it. And so I say that because now I go into the critical side of what I feel, generally speaking, is the church is so slow to get into innovation, and so slow to get into things that are reaching people, where people are at and where people are having conversations. And so a lot of what I do in my conversations is really encourage church to engage. Where are people at? Is that social media? Are you going to use an app? And so in the same way, I think virtual reality, at the risk of sounding like grandiose, I think virtual reality is going to be one of the most disruptive technologies that the church is going to encounter.
Wow.
And I don't know if that's in 2 years and in 10 years, but it's going to be such a disruptive thing. And I don't think the churches are going to know what to do with it. I think some are going to do a great thing, and I think some are going to, resist it, which seems like to be a traditional thing. But I think churches are going to have campuses that are virtual reality. I think it's not going to just be like, oh, we have a Facebook page, we have an app, these things that kind of support. I think it's going to come to the forefront in a major way. And so, as prices of the headsets goes down, what people don't hear about is the billions being spent. Like Facebook has spent billions to acquire Oculus Rift, one of the headset. So there's all this money being spent. And if Zuckerberg and Facebook are putting billions behind something, something's coming out the other end. So, yeah.
I'm surprised to hear that you've been involved with this since 2016. I mean, we're going on 18, 19 months of this. That's shows you how I didn't do my homework, I guess, before the conversation. But from the very beginning, I mean, what's the why? What's the driving purpose behind this? I mean, I think you would say to reach people with the gospel, but what's that end goal that you're looking for and building all this toward?
End goal, I think the pastor that really influenced me was Tim Lucas from Liquid Church. And he kind of had this theme throughout the years of taking church to the people. So Oftentimes there's this, where the church come to us, come listen to us over here at this time on a Sunday morning. And so that little philosophy kind of always has been jogging around in my brain. And so I think for virtual reality, it's like, let me go and take a faith experience to where people are at, and they're in VR. And so let's have a faith experience there. So I think I don't know if there's an end goal per se, other than just going into this new digital frontier and just engaging in conversation.
I love to your point here of going to the people and kind of going back to what you were just talking about is so much money is being spent in VR with what Facebook is doing and how they're bringing VR to people. And at the end of the day, other people are spending money to attract people that the church can now reach. We don't necessarily have to attract them. We just need to go to where they're going. Even, the pornography industry is spending billions. The gaming industry is spending billions. Yeah. And so they're engaging a lot of these folks where what a great place for the church to bring lightness in what is being used for darkness. But we can bring light to that. I love what you're doing so much for a church getting practical. You are leading innovation, obviously, by just even moving into the space a year ago, continuing to move forward. Is now the time for a church, or for think about just a traditional church that you say will have virtual reality campus? Should churches kind of wait and see? Should they dive in now? Is now the time to jump in? Because there's seasons for innovators, and then there's seasons for mass adoption.
Yeah.
Is now the time for adoption, or is now the time to kind of watch and learn and prepare yourself for the future?
I think it's about experimentation. So I think the church maybe misses that element of R&D that the secular world has, of research and development and experimentation and innovation. So you might not launch an official virtual reality church campus ministry, but you're at least tinkering around with it. Hey, IT guys, let's get some gear. Let's see what this is all about. Let's get in there. So I think that part is missing in the church. And the innovation pastor at Life Church, Bobby Grenwald, is that the name? Yeah. He had an amazing keynote to the IT roundtable, and he talked about how the church has outsourced innovation to Disney and to Apple and to Hollywood. And it's that's not an anti-Hollywood, anti-whatever. It's just saying in the church level, where's the innovation coming from? Where's the experimentation? And so I think at the very least there should be at least taking steps in that direction. And so I don't think maybe is the time to, launch a full-scale virtual reality ministry unless you feel led to. But I do think you need to start engaging in that world and start to understand it. And I think we kind of sometimes fear some things that we don't understand. And I think that's the thing, because as we're trying to, raise support, or even just forget monetary support, just bringing awareness, there's kind of a blank stare, with pastors about what VR is all about. So a lot of what we're trying to do is get them in there. As soon as people put the headset on, the light clicks. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of awareness, you've been profiled in Wired magazine recently, which is one of my favorite publications. I love Wired stuff. What's been the reaction to that article?
Oh man, it's even now it's nonstop. It's just emails and Facebook and Twitter from everything, just conversations. An NBC producer had just contacted me today. It's like all the gamut of interest, and I think it's interesting to people. And it really brought up some questions, and negative and positive. And so, my wife and I, we're just trying to manage all that's happening. It's kind of a whirlwind, to be honest, and a lot of positive conversations. I think for the most part, it seems like people are like, wow, well, I don't understand this, but that seems interesting. And I also think that people are really touched by the emphasis of the article of how we're reaching the atheist community and really having conversations with the atheist community. And I think that really, excites people about that.
It excites me. Let us be the first ones to get behind you and celebrate you.
Oh,
and
man.
Send the mean emails our way. We've got some great responses for them on your behalf, because we love what you're doing and what you're innovating.
That's great.
So if somebody wants to attend virtual reality church, how practically, how do they get there? How do they kind of find out about this virtual location once they get a headset, or even what headset should they get, and how do they?
Yeah. So on the downside is headsets are expensive right now. So, you know, the high-end ones, the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, the headsets themselves aren't too bad, but once you kind of get into the computer that you need for it, you can probably, you know, run 1,000 or more. You have the Gear VR. So if you have a Samsung phone, you can get a Gear VR. So that's an economical way to do it. And actually, I would say most of our people that attend are attending with the Samsung Gear VR.
Okay. Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think most of them, or the Google Daydream. The Google Daydream came out recently, and so yeah, I think 70 unofficially 70% of our people are on Gear or on mobile devices.
For those who might not know the difference, you want to explain the difference between like an Oculus experience and a Gear VR experience?
Yeah, so the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, they're like your more high-end, powerful, so the resolution's higher. You're going to need a strong graphics card to run those. The Gear VR is more mobile, so you won't see hand gestures from Gear VR users. It's just the base, maybe the textures are scaled down a little bit.
Because in Oculus, you've got the hand controls and you can interact with your environment in those higher end ones. But in Gear, you're really just kind of observing. You can still navigate.
Yeah, you can navigate, and you can tell the people that are just like the robots that just kind of turn and move forward. You're like, oh, that's probably a mobile user, and then you see the guys like waving their arms around, and like you could tell.
That's normal church behavior, though. Just walk in, kind of keep your hands to your side, walk around.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and you know what? We've had, there's amazing things about it, and then there's things we have challenges about. So. One service, a guy kept teleporting around saying, I like Indian women. I like Indian women. And started just trolling. And, one guy came and blessed us in the name of Satan. It was just kept going around. And so there's but there's moderation controls where you can, people pick people. And so, there's a little bit of the troll side that we have to deal with. So, we've raised up volunteers to kind of handle the moderation and the administration. Mm-hmm. And then the way our stack is, our communication stack is our experiences on Sunday in AltSpace VR. And then we have a community on Discord, if you guys are familiar with Discord. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great conversations. And so throughout the week, I'm interacting with volunteers, people that attend the church, on the Discord platform. So with a prayer channel, with a science and faith channel, a volunteer channel. So there's, even throughout the week, we're staying connected really at a high level.
I love this. Yeah. I love that. Tell us about some of your volunteers. I mean, who are these champions that are on board with you?
Oh man, and that's been such just an honor and a blessing. Because the Wired article featured me and my wife, but there's this whole side that this could not happen without these volunteers. And I guess that's with any church, to be honest. And so, that first week when we were launching, it was on the calendar that people could see Virtual Reality Church. And I was in you can have your own home in VR. So I'm in my little skyscraper, like a penthouse type of thing. And this guy named Chuck came in and he was like, hey, I've been hoping someone would start a church. And so he was like one of my first volunteers. This guy named Chuck, he goes to North Point, Andy Stanley's church. And he was just really, really excited about it. And so he was one of my first volunteers, and he connected me with Christians that he met in AltSpace. And it's just been amazing because there's also like a hub, like a campfire where people go when they log in at first, and you're like your first time there. You'll log in at like this campfire where everyone's hanging out, and there's employees from AltSpace that can help you. And so he'll go there and invite people to church, and these volunteers are amazing. And now we're starting to get into worship. And so I have a guy named Trey, and he's starting to take lead in the worship thing. So all these gifts I'm trying to unleash and hand over. It's just really amazing. So.
And where in the world is Trey from? I'm just curious.
I was thinking as soon as I said it, I think Midwest somewhere. I want to say maybe Tennessee or.
I love that you don't even know though. Like it doesn't matter. He's a part of our church.
Yeah. We have volunteers in Oregon. A teaching pastor, so to speak. One guy I'm trying to raise up to teach. He's from Miami. Chuck's from Georgia, and Trey, I think Mid somewhere or Midwest. And actually the whole breadth of the United States. There's volunteers.
And reaching people around the world. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you met anybody face to face that you first connected with in virtual reality?
No, but we were traveling through Indianapolis, and a trucker that had been visiting every week, real deep guy, and he was like,
I love this.
hey, pastor, he's like, oh, I'm at church today. Or whatever. But he was like 30 minutes away and we couldn't get connected. But that was probably the closest when we found out we were both in the Indianapolis area. This trucker that comes to our church. So, and he loves it because he can't, he's always driving. So he'll throw his headset on, his mobile headset on whenever he can get internet. And
yeah, that's great. So as you look to the future of this, and as you're a year in, what do you think the next year, 2 years, 3 years holds for virtual reality church?
I think at our core, our energy is real entrepreneurial and church planning. Mm-hmm. So there's new platforms that are about to come out. There's one called Sansar, and Sansar is very, like, when we talk about, let me back up. So at AltSpace, what we use is a little bit cartoony with the avatars and the robots. Sansar has a very photorealistic element to it. It's actually quite amazing. It's not in public release yet, but we've been messing around in the beta version. And one of these days, I'm telling you guys, one of these days, it's the real life, and then you put on your headset and you're not going to know, which one is, which, because it's going to look so close. And so yeah, we're going to, I think, church plant in Sansar. There's high fidelity that's coming out. VR chat is huge with the HTC Vive. There's one called Rec Room that's big on like PlayStation VR. So there's all these different platforms that we're keeping our eye on to have a faith experience. And, right now we're in AltSpace, but I think in the next year, starting to look to plant more churches in virtual reality.
I love that. I love that you have that background, entrepreneurial and church plant, because you call this a church plant, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
It is just hard. It is hard to wrap my mind around that being in church, but that being based. And I almost see it as like a campus. There are, as I think about a multi-site church, you can have multiple campuses in each of these spaces. I just as you communicate this, it's taking me back. I put on my first Oculus Rift about 5 years ago. And it took me into a different world, and it was just the original demo. And I remember thinking, church, we need to have virtual reality church in this experience. And I was like, this is coming. This is gonna be huge. And it's been so slow for adoption. And then I experienced Facebook Spaces that Facebook's kind of and I hung out with 3 dudes I didn't know before. I did a video conference with a friend through this, and it was like, and this guy like made me like a little like wine glass and like shared it, created it in virtual space and handed it to me. It took me into these places, this experience. I think you're right. I mean, you put that headset on, this is not, and if you've put on Google Cardboard, it's a whole different level when you put on an Oculus set. And I think where this is going, and then how you have tangibly taken the principles of church planting and transferred that to virtual reality. You've set a model that I think what's exciting for me in the future is to think about what happens when 1,000 churches move into virtual reality. And as so many people are moving into these spaces, because it's almost as if you're moving into a new country. You don't know anybody, but you're tinkering with the church should be. And this is what YouVersion did so well with the Bible app, is they were one of the first apps in the App Store, and that adoption by being there early. And so this is where for your virtual reality church, you being first, I think is going to attract so many non-believers. I think by the time a lot of churches get there, you will have missed some opportunity. I love that you're innovating.
I think some, theologically, I think some pastors have trouble with the idea, but I'm telling you, man, once we put the headsets on these pastors, I think they're going to have, their brain's going to shake up a little and think, man, something's coming. And so I think that's important to experience it. Like we mentioned before, what should churches be doing? Look into it, try it out, experiment. And, and for some people, this is their church. So, we have some people that, like the guy that attends North Point, and then he comes to virtual reality church in the evening. And then there's some people who like, I've never gone to church. I've never been to church. This is my church. Or I used to go to church and I don't like to go to church anymore, but I thought I'd check this out. And so for many people, the virtual reality church is their, experience. So
I want to give you just a chance to talk to what I'm sure is a question that you've already fielded a lot, where people are saying, and I think both Nils and I have taken arrows in the back on the same issue, like church has to be face-to-face.
Yeah.
Just what do you say to that?
I do think, that's the best experience to be face-to-face, but I think that VR is going to get real close in the realism and the expression and the immersion where it feels real. When I put my friend on it and, I put him in like some war zone, he took the headset off and said, that just felt so real. And I think that's what the response is, people, when they try it, it feels real. It feels like I'm there. So when you have those responses of people that try VR, I think that, it's going to be close to, a real life experience. And like I mentioned before, in many ways, it's going to exceed it because people feel comfortable, speaking about, what they're struggling with. So,
yeah. So my opinion on this, and having been involved in online church, online ministry, is that people will say these aren't real relationships. Anybody who has experienced online relationships, these are very real relationships.
Oh yeah.
But does it? But here's I think maybe the core question that even I struggled with online church for so long is, does it replace physical church? Like, can this completely be your place for spiritual community? I understand and this is, I don't know that I know the answer to this. So DJ, as you're living in this, can it be your complete church spiritual development community, or is this something that augments that? Or because I think what pastors are often saying is, are we trying to get people to skip church or leave church and move into these virtual spaces, or what is our end goal in this? So I'm curious, as you're getting into this, and I don't back here in a corner, no. I figure it out, but I'm curious your take on that.
So hear me out for a second. I think that the church isn't going to influence virtual reality. Virtual reality is going to influence the church. Ooh. I think it's going to be coming this way. And what I mean by that, and like I said before, I love the church, but on the critical side, sometimes you go and there's a lot of awkward in church. I went to, I've been in, real weird situations as visitors, at check-in, and the couple's fighting at check-in. That's checking our children in. And I'm like, so yeah, physical is great, but it's not the holy grail. I don't think so. I think that when people feel the immersion of it, it's just going to be hard to deny. And I think, like I said, the conversations that we're having are just so compelling. And I do think that it's going to be, I don't know about replace, but it's going to challenge that idea of church needs to be physical, which I totally believe in, by the way. But I think it's going to challenge it at a high level, and not to sound like a broken record, but it's going to be very disruptive to the church. Like, I don't think any other technology has been. So.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, for your family, if I can go here, could you see your family fully going to a virtual reality church and not attending a physical location, or will your family continue to be a physical church?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to back up a little bit, the sense of community that I feel, especially since we implemented Discord, is I feel very connected to my volunteers and the people that attend my church, because we're actually constantly chatting, just chatting here, chatting there. Discord's a little more instant than like a Facebook page or where we can comment and like and share. Discord has something about it that's more instantaneous and more connecting and more relational. So when we couple our VR experience on Sunday and then our Discord interactions throughout the week, yes, it's very, I know, like you were saying, well, maybe, in a physical setting, you'll get to know the people, and well, not all the times, like in some mega churches that, I've been on staff, you go and it's hectic and you sit and you listen and then you leave, you know what I mean? So there wasn't necessarily, a huge interaction element on a Sunday morning, but we get that on virtual reality church, and we get that through the week on Discord. So right now I feel highly connected, maybe even more so than I have been. Like, I was a campus pastor at a church. I probably feel more connected to my congregation, my volunteers right now through VR and Discord than I have before. So I think, to answer your question, we could see ourselves being fully VR.
I love it.
I can imagine in some ways the engagement in that community is deeper because it's beginning at that point. I mean, virtual reality is cool to just observe, like to be there and just stand in the room, but it really does invite engagement. And so if these relationships are starting with this context of, I'm going to engage in a relationship, I can see Discord, that's both inside and outside of the virtual reality environment.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's mostly outside. So it's kind of like how we interact through the week. And if without Discord, I'd probably say, our interaction with my volunteers and my church is probably less than, maybe at 50, 60%. But with Discord, it shoots it up where it's a hot, where I feel like, let's say 100% is this, golden standard of interaction with pastor and counseling and prayer. Man, with coupling virtual reality, the experience, and Discord throughout the week, it's really high. So
yeah, and so these, like, all these worlds, these, if we can use that word, online, offline, in VR, outside of VR, it's all blending. And what I'm really, so we were talking about our kids a little bit before we started recording, but like our kids are growing up in this reality where those lines are almost non-existent.
Oh yeah. Like we, I think there is a generational thing involved with that. That when I question, the spiritual, growth of someone in VR, I think my kids don't even think that you couldn't, grow spiritually in VR. So we have 2 headsets at right now, and my 15-year-old son, he attends, and so he comes and he's a part of it, and he loves it, and he's chatting with people from all over the world. Yeah. And he's he also does some modeling. So for Christmas, we put in the nativity and some Christmas trees and hang some lights up. And so he did all that in Blender, and we integrated into our VR space. So and actually, if you don't mind,
awesome.
I'm a rabbit trail real quick. Yeah. Man, we have VR allows you to do things that you just couldn't do in the real world. Like we're talking about, like, hey, let's say we talk about Moses parting the Red Sea. Let's have a full version of, like, the Red Sea that we can actually walk through it and talk about it. Noah's Ark. Let's create a replica of Noah's Ark. There is it really is like the Matrix. You really could just do anything in VR. So right now our experience is simple just because we're trying to maintain it, but we have big plans where this thing is going to turn into the Matrix, where our church morphs into a boat. There's already one created for, when we talk about Jesus, on the boat and things like that, and just actually being on the boat and talking about it. So church now in VR is going into a place where the experiences are just going to be crazy.
I love that.
Yeah. I do too. I think this is what's so exciting about this new world that you've moved into, DJ, is that you took kind of what we know in the physical and brought it to virtual reality, and now you are innovating in a way of you are bringing things that we could never do in the physical into virtual reality, which is enhancing a church community like never before. As we wrap up, go to vrchurch.com to learn more about virtual reality church. In the show notes at socialmedia.church, we will have contact info for DJ, his social handles, the information about VR Church. DJ, I cannot wait to be a church attender. I cannot wait to experience and be a part of this. I can't wait to bring my kids with me to virtual reality church. Thank you so much for innovating in this area and leading the way and setting a model, because I have no doubt that there will soon be hundreds of churches in virtual reality, and they will look to you. And so I appreciate you stepping out and doing this.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, DJ.